we know you've been waiting for it. You've been wanting it. We're back with Willie Pickton, Part 2. Oh, I'm sorry. The Pig Farm Killer, Part 2. And I'm going to say this right out the gate. There's a lot more research. Oh, God. I started reading the book On the Farm more, and I got so many details that you just cannot find anywhere else. It's actually quite impressive.
Right.
What Stevie Cameron was able to kind of unearth about this whole thing. So I want to again recommend this book highly. If you like any sort of career crime stuff, this thing has so many details. It's absurd. Like I have to dial down my notes because of it.
It's pretty horrid. I mean, it just kind of gets worse and worse and worse. And
it never gets better. Oh God.
Yeah, it never gets better. It's funny. I was telling my mom about what we were covering the other day, and
Yeah.
she was like, "Are you guys like breaking terms of service or anything by doing that? Because that sounds horrible." I'm like, "It's pretty horrible," but no, we're not. Surprisingly,
no, we're not actually. Shockingly, maybe we should be, but
maybe we are. Maybe we are, and we just
maybe
don't
that's why
know.
we're shadow banned, dude.
Yeah,
We figured it out.
Yeah,
We're talking about ooky spooky stuff too much.
I'm going to orbit message one day with Matt and Jake.
We left off last week with Willie and Dave opening up the Piggy Palace, and I'm going to say this right now. We're toning back. We're going back in time as far as this is concerned because there was a lot that happened before the Piggy Palace opened. Like a bunch of things happened before the Piggy Palace opened. But as you know, the events leading at the Piggy Palace were leading to the murders of many women, but they didn't always happen at the Piggy Palace. In fact, many of them didn't happen within the Piggy Palace at all. It just was a way for Willie Pickton to draw women to their farm. Now, what we didn't end up getting into last week was how Willie Pickton ended up in the low track in the first place.
Right.
His initial reason for being there was, his initial reason for being there at all was how often he frequented West Coast Reduction. Now, that's a rendering plant. Matt, are you familiar with rendering plants?
Yeah, unfortunately, because I didn't realize how dark they are. It's really disgusting, honestly. It's just where they take all the excess pieces and all the goodies that are left after slaughter, and well, they turn them into everyday products that we use, like chapstick and gummy bears and everything else horrible.
Delicious. We'll get into more detail too, because
I do like. I didn't like really understand the push for like vegan gummy bears, but I'm really starting to.
It's starting to make sense. Yeah,
for sure. It's starting to make a little bit of sense.
Now, the rendering plant was not far from the famed prostitute stroll in the low track. And he began going that way in the early 1980s. In fact, it wasn't long at all before he became a regular at the plant. I mean, he was there often, several times a week even. So regular that he would often pull his truck in and they'd just open the gate for him. They didn't check anything. They weren't looking at what he had, and they'd let him inside unseen. It would come in with these black 45-gallon barrels of viscera and guts, essentially, to have rendered. And the way that it would work is Willie and whoever else would get in line at the dump get in line at the plant, and they would dump the contents of the barrels, usually like entrails, visceral blood, buttholes, stuff like that, into the vats.
So gross.
Now, the remains of several working girls would end up in these vats over the next 10 or so years.
And keep in mind, like, this shit went into products. So, like...
Oh, I'm going to get into that.
Oh.
It gets dirty. It gets nitty and gritty.
Like,
Now...
Don't trust your chapstick.
No. Oh, no. When Willie couldn't get into town himself to bring the containers, he would have a driver come and pick the barrels up. Like somebody who worked at the plant. One of those drivers was Jim Kress. Jim would have to make several trips out to Port Coquitlam to pick up barrels of meat Willie had collected. Barrels of meat. Just think, just like
it's
you
gross
can almost smell
to
this
think
conversation.
about. it's disgusting to think about because, like, you know, normally you think of like slaughtering as like a very clean process. It's a very clean, like semi-sanitized place. But then you've got these guys who are hauling around 55
Hold on 1 second.
gallons. I'm going to continue. You got these guys who are hauling around 55-gallon tanks of just viscera. And like, this is like the shit that we don't eat. You know, the stuff that isn't even good enough to get like slammed into a hot dog casing. Wait, did this actually? Yes, this actually happened. This was a real thing. We're covering this guy in a 4-part series because it was that bad. Like I don't know if I want to go too far ahead of it, but basically he was disposing of these working girls in these vats, and the vats are divided into edible and non-edible. And so all of that would get processed into certain things that were like, you know, chapstick, gummy bears, lip gloss. What else did they used to do? Oh yeah, livestock feed, poultry feed.
All right, sorry about that.
It's pretty nasty.
Oh, I think I put my headphones on backwards. Yes, I did. That was strange. Okay, so
I was just explaining what these places do to people.
Oh,
like
okay.
What they do to animals and the parts that don't make it into hot dogs.
Yes, exactly. This actually did happen. Yes, King Nizumi, like 100%. This is a true story that I'm telling today. And I did forget to say that viewer discretion is advised.
Happened in Canada.
Yeah, in
The
Canada.
nicest place in the world.
100%. Now, Jim Kress later down the line would end up picking 2 to 5 45-gallon barrels a week from Willie Pickton.
Mm-hmm.
He did this for about 4 years. And one time he decided he was going to look in the barrels just to see what was there.
Yeah.
What he noticed was a little strange. The meat was black, like rotted almost, right? And oftentimes there was huge chunks of meat. It wasn't like, you know, viscera and stuff like smaller things going.
It wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't the fat. It wasn't the buttholes. It wasn't the blood. It was
exactly.
It was.
So it was meat. That's for sure.
It was them chops.
Now this surprised him. Most of the farmers that would go to these rendering plants, they would try to scrape off every piece of meat that they could. I mean, they would not leave any sort of leftover meat because that's what you do as a farmer. That's your bread and butter, literally. Gross.
I don't think it necessarily got turned into butter, but still, the idea of that is disgusting.
But here comes old Willie, and he's throwing away huge chunks of it. Now, no one ever asked questions or inspected what was in the barrels for regulars. Like,
why would you? He owned a pig farm, and like everyone knew him, and he was a regular customer.
He was a regular customer, and they would basically let regulars dump whatever they wanted.
I can guarantee policies changed after they figured this out.
Oh, probably. Now, there's 2 types of animal rendering processes. There's edible and inedible rendering. Edible rendering plants process fatty animal tissue into edible fats and proteins. These plants produce inedible tallow and grease, which are used in livestock and poultry feed. So, you know, and by the
inedible
way, cat
to
food,
human.
like you know the little stars you give to your cats, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the meow mix.
Yeah, they would even use it in soap and the production of fatty acids. Ugh. It's also used in candies, like particularly those with gelatin.
Gummy bears.
Gummy bears, Mike and Ike's, Airheads.
Anything chewy.
Do you like your childhood? Well, get ready to learn that you've been eating just the most disgusting parts of animals.
See, I'm happy to know that the gummy bears that I enjoy are made in, I think, Germany.
Oh, I'm sure there's nothing horrible that happens there.
No. Everything's safe there.
Mm-hmm.
You thought everything was safe in Canada, but no, everything's safe in Germany.
Yeah, no. There's definitely no awful grossness in Germany. Now, the things that are made in West Coast reduction are sent all over the world and end up in makeup, candy, cat food, soap, grease, all those things. Now, but they don't inspect what goes into the vats. because there's big vats where everybody's dumping all their shit, literally.
Yeah, I mean, these are the size of like large truck beds. I mean, they're just filled with meat.
Yep. And many farmers would fill their like barrels with exactly that. Meat, viscera, generally horrific things that you don't want to be messing with. Okay. Now you know what's going to happen, but I won't get into that just yet. Now, Willie, he was a fan of going to the reduction plant. Every time he went, he would reward himself with a drive around the ensuing neighborhood, eyeing women. The women walking around, the women he had heard so much about from Dave and his biker friends back at the farm. Many times, the bikers would bring some of these women around to parties, bars, etc. These women oftentimes being working girls. Okay. There's really no place quite like downtown East Vancouver. And I want to get into a little bit more detail because there's some things that certainly
it's bad.
Were not necessarily said. It's a true monument to being at your lowest low. People shooting up all sorts of various substances literally in front of you on the street. Pimps, sex workers, and their clientele all out in the open. Dirty cops and just simply unfortunate cops all doing as little as they can to keep this side of Vancouver even remotely safe. But perhaps the most heinous and disgusting area in Low Track was known fairly recently as, your discretion advised, the kiddie stroll. The kiddie stroll was where down on their luck sex workers aged anywhere as low as 11 to 17 would work the streets for people like Willie Pickton to peruse and abuse. The kiddie stroll was about 2 blocks west of West Coast Reduction. And now the kiddie stroll is known as the Franklin Stroll because the Franklin Street is the heart of the prostitution business in the area. A horrific yet very true thing is if a woman in this area were to get in any sort of trouble, anything, they'd likely not find any sort of help or even be heard.
Right. Well, you're the lowest of the low. They don't care.
Now,
At
the
that
worst
point,
part...
They do not care.
Yeah. They literally don't. They couldn't care less.
Yeah.
Now, the worst part is we're just getting started. We're going to go on a nice tour of the Low Track today. And I hope you're all ready with your barf bags.
Grab your drinks, grab your barf bag, and sit back.
Yeah. It's about to get brutal. Now, you go a bit further west down Hastings Street, 6 or 7 blocks to be specific, and you'll find yourself in the real heart of East Downtown Vancouver. The dirty, grimy horror you've seen and heard about, either last episode or, elsewhere. In particular, 1690 Hastings is a 3-story hotel known as the Vernon Rooms. But to the inhabitants of the Low Track, it was known as the Hoden.
Yeah.
The Hoden. Yes.
Not the hoedown, the hoedan.
No, the Hoden. If you found yourself as a prostitute this far into Hastings, you're likely so infected with either Hep A, B, C, or HIV, scarred, scabbed, gaunt, and withered that only the, quote, nightmare men would be your clientele.
Yeah, this is like the roughest of the rough. Like, this is like where you see people who look like they should be dead.
Yeah, like 30-year-olds who look like they're in their 70s. And
so drugged up and so just absolutely trashed.
Just horrifically sad.
Be dead. Yeah, it's super sad.
Now, of these nightmare men, there were particularly the Vietnamese gang members, many who have been suspected of making pure horrible things like snuff films with these women in this very hotel. The Vernon Rooms was run by the Hells Angels biker gang, as well as another hotel not too far away called the Mar. There's one place a bit further west that does as much good as they can, the First United Church. Volunteers there feed the poor, find them clothes, wash their feet, and bury their dead. People fled in and out of this sanctuary all day in hopes of some salvation, a place to sleep, or even just some kind words.
You know, it's bad when a church has to do the jobs of the people who are supposed to keep things clean, keep things safe. Like, that church is doing everything they can to keep these people semi feeling human.
Yeah.
And it's just awful to think of, a church has to handle burying dead bodies and doing all these things that normally shouldn't have to do.
No, just awful things. I mean, this is I said, just some of these people would go there even just for something as small as a kind word.
Yeah,
because
they
they
have
don't
something
hear
nice
anything
said to them.
nice.
Right.
To have a good
horrible.
conversation.
Yeah.
Now, what we were just talking about is the one place in the Low Track, or East Downtown Vancouver, where volunteers would feed the poor, find clothes for, working girls and, all of that stuff. Because one big spoiler, I guess, is all of his victims happen to be working girls from this area. Oh God, it just gets so much worse.
It gets bad.
Now, the church would lend space to WISH, which is the Women's Information Safe House, an evening drop-in center for sex workers that runs Monday through Friday. Sometimes more than 100 at a time could be seen grabbing a hot meal, a shower, clothes, or even just companionship among,
Friends,
one another.
if they had
Lady of
friends.
Chaos. It really is always the working girls. And this story is...
No exception.
If you're familiar with the term the less dead, this is very, very prevalent here and very, very sad. Very, very kind of hard. We try to keep it a little more lighthearted here, but today might not be so much.
Today's pretty dark.
Yes, absolutely. Now, the last area that we'll cover in the low track is the awful single room occupancies where many sex workers, drug addicts, mentally insane people lived. These people moved from the low track in the 70s after the Essendale Mental Hospital was shut down. These hellholes were infested with rats, cockroaches, and slimy, downright evil management.
Yeah.
They were so evil that they would fence stolen goods in exchange for drugs to these people who were already at their very lowest.
Well, and these are people who take advantage of the fact that they know that this mental hospital shut down and that they're taking advantage of the people who were affected by that shutdown.
Absolutely.
So
Now,
you're talking about the lowest of the lowest of the low.
Oh, just the dirtiest, smarmiest, evil pieces of shit that you can really think of.
Right.
Now, they would not only fence stolen goods in exchange for drugs, but they would still charge any person looking to, quote unquote, stay with a lady, $20 minimum for a room. Now, worst of all, these SROs often charge $350 a month in rent, which happens to be the allotment welfare gives for shelter to its recipients. So, they knew what they were doing.
Take exactly what they get.
Now, these places are obviously very evil and run by organized crime like the Hells Angels, the Vietnamese gangs, and even the Russian mob come up in this story, which is just insane to me. This is this whole thing is so overarching and just insane. There's so much going on here. $350 a month for rent doesn't sound bad now. We're talking like in the 70s and 80s. This is what they would charge for rent. I mean, Willie Pickton went on his worst killing sprees from the 80s to the 90s. So, $350 a month. Let's see. What does that even equal out to? Inflation calculator. Welcome to Tech Message, or we Google things live.
We do it all the time.
Oh yeah, it's a big. All right,
It's a huge
so
part of
choose
our
years.
show.
Let's just say 1985 because that's really
Okay.
when this was like the worst of the worst area. We're gonna say $350. So that is actually $876.59 today.
So that's about right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish I could. Yeah, so, and again,
So do
we
I.
all are saying we wish we could pay that for rent, but when you are a working girl, your entire life
Z's
has
right.
gone down the drain.
Canadian exchange rate. Did you do Canadian dollars?
I didn't. You know what? Okay, so $876.59.
Let's correct
So
our science.
USD to CAD. Is that what it
To
is?
make sure that this is absolutely 100% right.
$1,108.60.
Holy hell.
Yeah. Gnarly.
So it's even worse.
It's even worse than
God
initially
damn.
we thought. Okay. And again, I want to reiterate to everyone here, it's actually not that bad. These are two people who are at the lowest of their low.
Yeah.
or mental patients from a recently closed mental
Right.
hospital that was just up the way. It's like working girls weren't even considered humans. I was surprised that it wasn't that long ago that they were viewed this way. Some bodies found, they didn't classify them as humans. It's so awful.
It is horrible.
I mean, it's
it's awful.
It's so unfortunately common, and especially in the story of those from the low track, and especially for the native women from the low track area.
Yeah.
It just gets worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
Now, the final stop on our tour of the low track is a block west of First United, the Carnegie Center, which was once an actual beautiful library built by Andrew Carnegie. It's now a community center filled with the wretched and mentally ill. That being said, It's also kind of the eye of the storm. It has
Where
shops
it
staffed
all
by
starts.
yeah, well, it's the eye of the storm, meaning like it's like you can go there and you can feel safe within the low track, believe it or not.
Right.
It has shops staffed by parolees and ex-convicts trying to do honest work and even offers good, cheap food. Across the way is DEYAS, the Downtown Eastside Youth Activity Society, which sounds great, but it's really better known as the Needle Exchange, a place where upwards of 700 users a day go for a safe place to shoot up, known as Insight, which was very controversial, but also I feel necessary in areas particularly like this. They would offer you a clean needle and even offer therapy with nurses and counselors. Now, I do want to give a caveat here. DEYAS was shut down in 2009 due to extreme debt and serious mismanagement.
To their credit, at least they were trying to make what those people were doing safe, but at the same time, like, were they offering plans to help them get off of this stuff, or were they just being like, here, you can at least be sterile?
That's even if that's the case, I feel like that's totally okay. Because like here, at least you cannot like spread horrific disease.
Right. That's true. That's very
so
true.
As much as it's terrible,
What
that
an
it has
odd
to exist.
concept. Because could you imagine just walking into a place and a bunch of people sitting in this nice clean room shooting up fucking heroin?
Heroin, crack, whatever it happens to be that they're shooting
That's
up.
such a weird image to think about.
Yeah, double-edged sword indeed.
No, very much so, yeah.
I certainly agree. Now, patrolling up and down these blocks at night is a roving gang of aggressive drug dealers selling anything from heroin, crack, cocaine, and especially something called TNRs. I learned about these. I've never known what they were before. A mix of Talwin, which is a painkiller, and Ritalin, which is a stimulant. Now, these are known primarily as poor man's speedballs, as they only cost $2, whereas normal speedballs, which are a mix of heroin and cocaine, run $20 per speedball. So, yeah, the poor man's speedball, which is known as a TNR, fucking awful. I mean, and these people are fully taking advantage of the fact that there's a needle exchange right there. Right. And
it's
the
cheap.
police,
They don't have money because of the fucking hotel.
Yeah.
So like, of course they're going to go for the $2.
Yeah, they're going to go for the cheapest thing that they
The
can
cheapest
get.
option.
Now, the police presence here is known, but not for stopping any of the madness happening in the streets. This is really important to remember when regarding the Willie Pickton case, because the police just, I've already said this in the prior episode, but they literally could not have cared less.
Yeah, they did not give a shit.
I used to go to that part of town when I visited Vancouver because the rooms were cheap in the area and it was close to where the concert venues were. You went to East Hastings?
Ooh.
I remember the needle exchange places and the people in the parks. Oh,
wow. I don't know. I mean, I guess I can't say like much about that because we see a lot of it here where we live too. Not nearly as bad.
Nowhere near as bad.
But I mean, we do see it in certain areas of town.
Yeah, not too far from me actually.
You're definitely closer to it than I am.
Yeah, that is true. You'll be there before you know it. Just kidding.
We have Central. That's our low track. Just not as bad.
Central's kind of low track here. It's not nearly as bad.
No.
Yes, I did. I was invincible. You must have thought you were because you're fucking lunatic. Now, the East Downtown side of Vancouver became the way it was because of a political push in the 1970s and 80s. An unapologetic mayor said that while it's unfortunate that these women are being attacked and killed, citizens wanted them off the streets.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Because that's valid, right? That's a
what
totally good excuse.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Oh, fuck. This is so bad.
Now, while the exact number is not known, the estimate is about 10 to 14% of the women living in the low track appear to be of Aboriginal descent. Yeah. Nearly a third of the women who went missing were also of Aboriginal descent.
Just super sad.
Now, let's have a nice little conversation about the VPD in this time. I'm not going to say now. Maybe they were a lot better. I don't honestly know.
During this time, they were bad. They were shit people.
The worst of just the worst fucking cops ever. I mean, like, if you can look at a person and just see them as not a person, that's what they did.
Well, to be fair, at that point, you shouldn't be in policing, but that's what they hired back then.
Now, I want to start with a short but horrible story. Like, just despicably disgusting, okay? In the early 1980s, there was a rash of women dying of severe alcohol poisoning. Many of these women were native or aboriginal, and many were working girls. The killer would pick these women up, force them to drink lethal amounts of alcohol, and then watch them die. This man's name was Gilbert Paul Jordan. The police not only knew of Jordan's presence, but they knew of his murders.
Yeah.
They'd come across a scene of a murder in which a woman died of alcohol poisoning and so, hey, oh, look over there. We got ourselves another Jordan-esque. They had a fucking nickname for the murders of these people. This was because the police in Vancouver hated investigating these murders, especially those perpetrated by a serial killer. Apparently, it's too much work. They didn't want to do the paperwork. They didn't want to have to get the funding. All that
Super
kind of
tough to
stuff.
do their job.
And again, we're talking political push back,
Yeah.
back when, right?
Yeah.
They saw working girls as lesser than throwaways. Murder is literally not worth solving.
Yeah.
Now, this info was brought forth by Kim Pemberton, who was a police reporter at the Vancouver Sun at the time. His murders were believed to have started in 1965, but finally ended in 1988 when he was caught. So he was caught. The police did their job, right? Right? Wrong.
Yeah.
His charge? Manslaughter. He was released in 1995.
It's pretty shitty.
Just take a second to take that in.
Pretty bad.
Yeah. What is exactly right? This man, who the police knew was out poisoning women with alcohol to death.
Yeah.
He was in jail from 1988 to 1995 on the charges of manslaughter. Now, to be fair, places outside of the low track said, hey, stay away from this man. He's not a good person. But
Not
that's
good at
the
all.
best they did.
That was it. That
He
was
never
it.
got
Like, it
formally
was-
charged with a murder or anything.
Well, everything that he got was a slap on the wrist.
Literally. Like manslaughter is a serious charge if manslaughter is what happened. But it is not. What he was doing
No,
was full
that's-
scale murder.
That's serial killing.
Serial killer. Literally
Yeah,
serial
that's-
killer.
That is serial killing.
Here, you know what?
Sorry.
Paul Gilbert Jordan victim count. Let's just look it up.
Nice is 99% of Canadians.
Gilbert
saying
Paul
they're not
Jordan. I'm
nice?
so sorry. I misread that. Canadian law is just as nice as 99% of the Canadians. His estimated victim count was 10.
Jesus.
However, he has later come out and said that it was much more. So there's
Which
that.
they have no proof of like what he did or what he
Because they didn't try.
Right, they didn't track it. They
No.
just cleaned up.
Now, since 1982, 14 women had been killed, 8 of which were strangled, 5 of which were stabbed, and 1 was bound and tortured.
Yeah.
The Sun believed there could have been like a Bundy or a Green River Killer style person in their own home.
Yeah.
The RCMP did build up a task force, which was disbanded in 1989. The reason was a lack of evidence. Now, the RCMP, again, we're not talking bad about the RCMP. They're basically the FBI of Canada, and they do
Right.
their job for the most part.
Right.
Just as much as the FBI. No. Come on, let's be real. You didn't need to worry about cleanup. You had the cops that didn't want to do their jobs too. Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep. That's it.
Now, the Vancouver Sun would cover each and every one of these murders. And they firmly believed in the idea that these people still dying were daughters, sisters, mothers. I mean, like they were people is
Right.
really the point. I mean, these were people who were dying. But the racist, sexist police of the time, they could not have cared less.
They didn't care.
They
just,
didn't.
Like I said, they were basically glorified, homicide janitors. Like they would just deal with the cleanup and call it good. There was no evidence gathering. There was no case building. The RCMP did what they did, but like it was never enough.
No, not whatsoever.
Yeah.
It just god awful. Just now, Staff Sergeant Bob Law dismissed the idea of it being a serial killer, but did share a concern that many of the killings did share similarities and may suggest one person was behind them. And that sure as hell to me sounds like a serial killer.
It totally does. And
I'm going to be honest with you. That sounds like a serial killer.
It's just mind-boggling to me that they just wrote it off.
Even the prostitutes in the area at the time offered help to the police. And this is not something that they would do.
Oh, hell no.
You have to keep in mind, the police are working against working girls just as much as they're working against real criminals.
Right.
Right. So they even offered their help. Okay. They would keep track of tricks. Tricks are known as, clientele that got violent, and they had trick sheets giving information down to even these men's license plates. The number of reports from prostitutes grew from 40 to 70 in 1987 alone.
When the working girls,
this,
evidence gathering was better than the police's.
Exactly, because they cared.
Yeah.
But none of this mattered.
Yeah.
Many believe at least some of these homicides were linked to pig shit fuckface himself, Willie Pickton.
Yeah.
An account from one woman from an online forum in 2004 stated that a friend of hers had survived an encounter with Pickton 20 years prior, putting Willie right in the time frame. Mm-hmm. The police basically told her she had to either go home or to a youth detention center as a result of her reporting this assault. So you hear that, right? Right? Like they literally, because she went to them, they said, you either go to a youth detention center or you'll go home.
Mm-hmm.
Willie Pickton, he's a good man. Basically. They didn't say that, but, it's conjecture. Point being, one of these women actually did go to the police and say, like, hey, this guy's bad. We need to do something here. But nothing happened. Now, cops
it was still very much like, oh, he's a bad guy, but
Big Rig Barry, welcome to the
wait and
stream.
see.
We haven't seen you here in a minute, buddy. It's great to
It's been
see
a while.
you.
It's good to see you. It's good to see you.
Yeah. Again, viewer discretion is advised.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about Barry. I don't think he's going to be like, now, cops are incredibly hesitant, even to this day, to link many cases from the early 80s to Willie Pickton.
Right.
But it's highly possible that several of the unsolved cases were literally at his hands. Cops gave zero fucks. What are people meant to do when they seek help and don't get it? That's honestly a great question. What are they supposed to do?
Take the law into your own hands, apparently.
Yeah, exactly. But nobody did, right?
No, nobody did.
Now, the VPD were nothing short of apathetic to women going missing in Vancouver's East Side downtown. But by 1991, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, aka the RCMP, were willing to try again. They started something called Project Eclipse, a project that put together some of the continent's very best criminal profilers in an attempt to discover if there were serial killers in the area. I mean, we're talking some of the best of the best. I didn't write their names down because I'm dumb. But the people who inspired Mindhunter, which if you haven't seen it is excellent, they were some of these people. Okay. And another one of those people is a man known as Kim Rossmo. We'll get more into him later.
Yeah.
Now, the findings led to the belief that there were very likely serial killers, at least 1 to 3, in the area at the time. Now, when this information was presented to the VPD by the RCMP, the reception was nothing short of cold, lackluster, and they pretty much did nothing with it. Right. Literally nothing. Now, Kim Rossmo recalls that a lot of the problem with this was they were lacking resources, they were lacking funding, but mostly they didn't know what the fuck they were doing.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? They did not know what they were doing. And they didn't want to know what they were doing, especially when it came to serial killers, because serial killers, once again, were work. And unless it was a murder of somebody they felt was worthy of investigating, they just didn't do it.
Yeah. Well, and the problem is they weren't killing people who were of importance at the time.
Exactly.
Because of the way people look down on sex workers and the way they look down on people who had addictions, there was just no need to care. Therefore, why would you want to investigate something that's only affecting this group of people that nobody cares about?
Exactly.
And
which is just
fucking awful is what it is.
Just so absolutely horrific to think about.
Right.
Now, Project Eclipse ended. And while it wasn't a failure, it certainly did not help change the perception of the VPD when it came to the murders of these sex workers.
Yeah.
Now, this was when one of the very few cops who cared stepped in, and his name is Kim Rossmo. Now, Rossmo is a cop who had worked the east side downtown for 8 years and had plenty of experience in the field. He was also a computer analyst who had started developing a subspecialty called Geographic Profiling. The general idea was serial offenders oftentimes stuck in a specific area, somewhere they felt comfortable. Generally, violent offenders lived near or around their quote-unquote killing grounds or their homes. And that's, that was essentially the theory here, right? Now, Rossmo had a PhD in criminology and was well respected around the world as a criminal profiler. I mean, he was huge. He was part of Project Eclipse. Now, his program was often seeked out by several agencies, and generally, he was what a lot of people would call like a super cop. He was like Canadian's Mindhunter. Right. You know what I mean?
He was
100%.
The guy. When they were stuck on a case, they would go to this guy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, while many people regarded him highly, not everyone did.
Yeah.
In the VPD, they had something called the Old Boys Club. And this was a group of old, dingy, gross cops who hated Rossmo. I mean, they hated him so much, horrifically. Hold on one second. Is Matt on the radio?
Do I sound like I'm on the radio?
Don't do any of this, please. Please don't do any of this right now.
Yeah, don't do this right now.
I'm asking you.
This is a podcast.
Yeah, we don't want to fuck with the podcast. You don't sound like you're in a radio. You sound pretty good.
Okay, good. I'm glad I don't sound like I'm in a radio because I'm like, what did we just do?
Yeah. Okay. All right. So make sure you go through and cut these moments out.
Yes, I will.
Now, they hated Rossmo almost to the point of him literally leaving the department, but the chief saw his value and promoted him to detective inspector. Now, this infuriated the scummy cops even more. They'd oftentimes pull pranks on him. They would haze him. They would steal his office supplies and were just really bad to him in general. One experience he had was a fellow officer needed a bulletin board. So instead of buying his own, he took Rossmo's, literally, directly out of his office. Just
ripped it off his wall and took it?
Literally. Not even joking. Now, all of this did bother him, but his place at the VPD was very much cemented. And what he went on to do, he did well. And even with the toxicity in the workplace, which made people even more angry.
Right.
See, so that's really what it came down to. Now, all the while, women continued to disappear in the downtown east side. Now,
yeah,
this is theoretically where I should be leaving it off, but I'm just not ready. So I'm going to skip this top area. Let's remember that. All right.
Okay.
All right. In June 6th, 1992, 9 months after Project Eclipse, 39-year-old Kathleen Watley disappeared. Watley was a known black sex worker in the area. She had just recently been arrested earlier that year for soliciting to an undercover cop. 4 months later, Elsie Sebastian, a 40-year-old Aboriginal woman, also disappeared. Let me take a sip of water, because good God. Okay. A 40-year-old Aboriginal woman also disappeared.
Right.
She left behind 4 children. The children did attempt to report her missing because they loved their mom, but the VPD simply said, 40-year-old Aboriginal women don't just go missing.
Yeah.
Literally.
That doesn't happen.
No, never.
No.
Implying she had simply left her children behind.
That's fucked to say to a kid.
Yeah.
Nah,
even if they're grown. Even if they're grown.
Right.
You just don't say that.
That just hurts.
April 15th, 1993, Teresa Louise Triff went missing. And I'm making a point here to say these women's names because they deserve to be heard. Okay, these are victims, right? April 15th, 1993, Teresa Louise Triff went missing. Not much was known about her other than the fact that she just simply vanished.
Right.
15 women had now gone missing from the low track between 1979 and 1993. December 17th, 1993, Erin McGrath received a phone call from her sister Lee Miner. Lee tells her she's coming home for Christmas. All she needs is a couple bucks to get out there. Erin, who was hopeful, sent her sister money, even though she knew that Lee was heavily addicted to heroin and living in the low track. I believe she lived in the Astoria. If I'm wrong, you can fact check me. That's fine.
Well, you always hope that, somebody gets better. So
Yeah.
why not,
Yeah, Lee was 35 years old and working as a working girl.
Mm-hmm.
Her life definitely should have not gone the way that it did, but some horribly sad circumstances led to her choice to do what she did. Lee grew up in San Francisco in the 1960s, and as anyone would, she experimented with drugs. In 1975, their father passed away suddenly, leaving 4 kids behind. This was devastating for the family. 4 kids, I mean, shit. And then he just all of a sudden dies. It's awful. A few years later, though, she fell in love, and she was sure life was the best it could be. However, she did notice almost right away that her husband suffered from depression. One day at their home, he shot himself, and he died in her arms. This led Lee to the only coping mechanism that she had, which was heroin.
Yeah.
I mean, just
can't
awful.
blame somebody for going through that much shit.
And I'm going to say this woman is going to be somebody who I go into the most detail with, because I want to share with you how much detail Stevie Cameron goes into in the book. I'm not going to do this with every single one of these women, but you will hear all their names at the very, very least, because again, they were people.
Right.
Now, after he died in her arms, she got to heroin. The family moved to Vancouver, and after Lee had gotten pregnant, she tried her best to kick her heroin habit, but she just couldn't. Her life ended up taking a turn down the wrong road in the low track, living in a hotel, paid for sex to get her fix.
Yeah.
She never showed up for Christmas. Erin was hurt and upset and even felt betrayed, but when Lee didn't show up at all, like she didn't even reach out, alarms were raised.
Right.
She attempted to report Lee missing with the VPD, but, and I think you can tell where this is going, very little effort was put into her disappearance. Lee Minor was the 16th woman to disappear in the low track area.
It's just crazy to me that this many instances of just poor policing and investigation.
And this is just missing. We're not even talking about the murders that had happened.
Right. This is where you start looking for people and you start trying to find them, but they just didn't care at all. It didn't matter what it was. It's just amazing how shitty this all was.
It's horrific. I mean, it's god awful.
Yeah.
August 19th, 1994, Angela Arsenault, who was only 17 years old, went shopping with her boyfriend. She got on a bus and was never seen again. She was the 17th woman to disappear.
Yeah.
It wasn't until an insane spike in the year 1995 that police really started to get concerned. On February 23rd, Bill Wilson was on his way home when he stopped at a ditch and saw what appeared to be a brown bull. He decided to pull over and take a closer look and realized what he was looking at was half of a human skull. Now, the skull had been sawn in half. Wilson thought maybe he ought to call the police, but he had some errands to run, and after that, well, it was bingo night.
God.
So Wilson, he did have a criminal record, a pretty severe one, sexual assault to be particular here. So maybe he didn't want to get involved, but eventually he did do the right thing. And while I understand that he's like, oh, well, I don't want to get involved, he still did get involved. So why not just do it sooner rather than later?
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
I don't know. I mean, to me, if you see a fucking sawed in half skull on the side of the road, you generally call somebody.
Yeah, you should probably let somebody know.
But no, apparently not. You just say, I got bingo.
Now, 24 hours later, he called the police to tell them of his findings. The police did pick up the skull and sent it to a forensic pathologist who determined it was the skull of a younger woman, probably in her 20s.
Damn.
She'd likely died 12 to 24 months prior. Jane Doe was never identified, even after the police attempted to recreate her face using the skull. Little did the police know the rest of her bones were buried in a pit just up the road at a farm owned by none other than Dave and Willie Pickton. Okay, so let's rewind. After a while, Dave and Willie simply could not stand living together. Dave would oftentimes throw parties. He'd have people over and they would pick at Willie. splashing him with water, which Willie hated beyond belief, if you'll remember from the last episode.
Right.
Now, the final straw was when one of Dave's girlfriends told Dave she no longer wanted Willie in the house because he, quote, creeped her out.
Yeah.
After a particularly violent argument between the brothers, Dave kicked him out, told him to find somewhere else to stay. Willie set up a bed on top of one of the freezers in a shed on the property and stayed there for months.
Yeah.
I mean, good God. Not too long after that, though, Dave worked out a solution. He bought 2 motorhomes and put them on the property. One of them was Willie's new living area. It was a Dodge Fargo DeSoto motorhome. You can look it up. It's fun. You can learn stuff.
It's fun. Good.
Absolutely. It had a tiny toilet, shower, countertop, stove, sink, and even a refrigerator, which is pretty cool. Now, Willie moved it to the back of the property, and, well, all was finally well with him. Willie was happy. He finally had a bit of privacy, and he no longer dealt with Dave's obnoxious workers and friends. Though he valued privacy, he never minded having people share the place with him. One of those people was Tanya Carr, who stayed with him from 1994 to 1995. She was one of the many women who would live with Willie. None girlfriends, just someone to help with laundry, clean up the place, rarely. And sometimes they would go to auctions 4 to 5 times a week with him.
Right.
In this time period, a decrease in disappearances was noted. So, that's exciting.
It's good. It's good.
Yeah.
Less people were disappearing. You still have people disappearing, but less people were disappearing. So, that's obviously an improvement.
And you'll notice I said...
Why research it?
He said 1994 to 1995.
Right.
1995 is when it got real bad, if you'll remember.
Yeah.
My God. Now, let me find it here. Now, Jane Doe was one of... Okay, yes, this is where I was trying to be. Sorry, I'm trying to remember where I'm going all over my stupid notes. Jane Doe was the first of 5 women to disappear in 1995.
Mm-hmm.
The others were Catherine Gonzalez, 27-year-old who disappeared in March, Catherine Knight, also 27, who disappeared in April, Dorothy Spence, who disappeared on July 30th, and finally Diana Melnick, who was 20 and disappeared December 27th. Diana had actually just become a millionaire without knowing. She got a serious inheritance, and she probably never found out.
No.
All of these women
it was too late.
Yeah, they pretty regularly reached out to their families to stay in touch. But when the phone calls stopped, well, the missing persons reports started. Now, April 1996, Frances Young, a 36-year-old former working girl in the Vancouver area, went missing. Pat, her mother, went to the police. The police claimed there was nothing they could do. Literally, they told her there's nothing they could do.
It's ridiculous.
And this is a woman who just had literally just gotten a new job. Her life was turning around and she was kicking her addictions and all this wonderful shit.
Right.
But they told her, nothing we can do for her.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. Ugh. She finally got a missing persons poster up, but are you sensing a pattern here?
Yeah.
On October 29th,
Spoiler
1996. Yeah, seriously. October 29th, 1996, Tanya Hulk went missing. November 1st, her mother tells the police, and they say, Native women don't just go missing from the downtown east side. She's out having fun.
Yeah. That's what it is. She's out partying.
Yeah. She's just out partying. No worries. Now, the last woman to disappear in 1996 was Olivia Williams. She was last seen December 6th. Now, this is where we will be ending this episode because it is going on.
Well, and that's the end of our notes.
Yeah. Well, no, it's not. It's not.
Well,
if you look further, it's not.
Yeah.
While she may have been the last, another known as Tracy Bouillon almost became the 5th.
Right.
She lived at the Astoria, which was a favorite spot of Willie's. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see Willie standing in front of right there.
Mm-hmm. Yep. He's there. He's in the window. Wave hi to Willie.
Yeah, wave hi to Willie. Now, while she may have been the last, another known as Tracy Bouillon almost became the 5th. She lived at the Astoria, a favorite spot of Willie's. He was famously known there by all the working girls. Tracy said, Willie? Everybody knew him. His truck was a pretty familiar sight. Though everyone knew Willie, he wasn't really a regular of hers. That night, however, he decided to pick her up, and he asked for a blowjob. She said it'd be $40, and they were on their way. Once she climbed into the truck, the smell almost pushed her right back out.
Ugh.
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 Willie Pickton, just absolutely horrifically disgusting.
Right. He didn't shower. He didn't bathe. He didn't touch water.
No. He was afraid of water. He would literally
he was filth.
He had an irrational fear of water hitting his face.
Yeah.
Literally.
He was just absolute filth.
Like 200% just disgusting. Gross.
Yeah. Just gross.
Now, everything that he did was stinky for those of you who are just coming in. Awful. Just the grossest of the gross. Now, once she climbed into this truck, again, she almost got pushed out by the smell. He took her out to his trailer, which was on the farm, which she described as absolutely horrific. Clothes everywhere.
Horrendous.
Dirty, rotten smell. I mean, like papers lined up like a hoarder's shack, but also covered in pig shit because he let his pigs run around.
Right.
Everywhere.
Keep in mind, the pigs were free roaming, so they just went inside, outside, all.
The pigs were dogs, and they were just as dirty as you can imagine.
Yeah.
Now, they did their business, and as she was getting dressed, he told her he couldn't find his wallet. He then pulled out a knife and threatened her, saying she had taken it. You took my wallet. Right? Mm-hmm. He walked up to her and cut 2 buttons from her shirt. This is just straight up fucking creepy. This is like nightmarish. Like this is like, I can't even imagine a situation like being in a situation.
You would
like
never,
this.
you would never want to be in a situation like this, let alone imagine one.
Now she, like any sane person would do, just walked out of his trailer. She just left. Right? She just, let's go. I'm going to get on out of here. Whatever. She waited outside for a little bit. When he finally decided to walk out, he gave her purse and her wallet back. After this exchange, he drove her back to the downtown east side, all the while talking about how he likes helping working girls, helping them kick their various drug habits. He only gave them one chance, though. She's quoted saying of him, "If they go back to dope, well, then they don't deserve to live. They're useless.
Good.
Better off dead."
Very good. Yeah.
She went on to say he'd go after the ones with the worst habits, those addicted to speedballs, especially those going through withdrawals.
Yeah.
He'd say to those who went back to dope, "You're useless, just fucking bitches." Tracy, however, did not ask Pickton for drugs, so he assumed she didn't do them. What he didn't know is she had a rule: never do drugs while on a date. He never stopped for her again. She didn't report to the police what happened because, frankly, nothing would have happened anyway.
Right.
She did, however, tell the women at Wish, who added him to the bad date list. Now, Willie would go on to do something absolutely horrific, and one woman survived. And that's where we'll pick up for part 3 of The Pig Farm Killer. I hope you all enjoyed.
Such a crazy fucking story, man. Just
Oh,
the more I read into it and the more I look at it, like it gets deeper and deeper and darker, and it's just fucking crazy.
Just absolutely disgusting. And next week we're getting really down and dirty. My God. Really, really awful stuff.
We've laid the base. Now we're going to talk about the horrible things.
Today we went on a tour of the low track. We learned about the cops' useless ideas, but my Lord, this is going to get horrific.
It's going to get nasty.
And again, I also want to say this kind of firmly cements Willie Pickton as what is known as a missionary killer.
Yeah.
He sees these women are addicted to drugs. He tries to help them. They go back to drugs. He murders them.
Yeah.
So,
Just the best
all
way
that
to
kind
do
of
it,
stuff.
apparently.
Yeah.
We
Oof.
tried once, and then that's it.
Yep. You only got one shot. If you're addicted to heroin, which is one of the hardest things in the world to not be addicted to,
Because of that.
that's what he would do.
Oh.
But folks, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Morbid Message Monday, this time on Wednesday, but it'll be available on Spotify tomorrow, which is Thursday.
Yes.
Just go with it. Don't
Yes.
forget, we are going to be jumping into Dying Light 2 in just a moment. But
week
I
is
want to say
yeah,
it's a little weird.
it's a little.
I
want
wanna
to
say-
a little bit weird.
Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Yes.
Don't forget to follow Morbid Message Monday on all the socials. It's there. Make sure you also follow Tech Mess on all the socials, ! socials.
Yeah, and if you just
exclamation
want
mark
to
YouTube.
join us and talk, ! Discord. We
Absolutely.
have an open conversation for topics for Morbid Message Mondays, and we have everything else you could think of.
Absolutely. And we are 100% would love to hear your ideas.
We even have a bar.
Yeah, we sure do. The Masonic Watch, where you can watch us with fellow Messonites.
Mhm.
Now, I hope you had a great day, night, evening, whatever it happens to be that you were having, Messonite. And well,
Goodbye.